Everybody, and welcome back to Norwich Talk for another podcast number 35. And today is a little bit of a special one as we begin to preview Norwich City's campaign that lies ahead back in the Championship. Now, I'm joined by a very familiar face on this YouTube channel, Mr. Benjamin Bloom. Ben, how are you?
Yeah, you love the Championship, don't you? I knew you'd come back and join us, Ben. Hey.
Oh dear, it is a very good league, and I'm looking forward to sort of previewing it and catching up on last season. The intention behind this podcast for me is to sort of catch up on what we missed last season. Now, I think it's probably fair to say you are a trusted source of knowledge when it comes to the Championship, so I think this is going to be a sort of beneficial exercise, whatever you want to call it, for me as well as the viewers, because I didn't really follow the Championship last season. I tried to pretend that we were going to stay in the Premier League, but that didn't last for long. Obviously, the last time you were on this channel, we just got promoted, and you were chatting to Connor about all the things that sort of lied ahead for Norwich and how the season went. We're back down in the Championship. The first question I want to ask you is, obviously, we've got hindsight, but does it surprise you that Norwich are back down?
It's this tricky one to answer because I did think there was a scenario where when we knew that they were going with the same players, that the pattern of play was so strong from the 18-19 season that it could have worked in the Premier League. So I did look at it and think, well, which teams are normally successful in the Premier League? It's normally not to do with recruitment. It's normally to do with what you're coming up with. So I did think, it might be okay, but I think given the lack of recruitment and then what had transpired was it came into even more stark fashion that Norwich had basically got promoted without doing any defending. Mm-hmm. When you now go back to that 18-19 season and look at 3-2 against Bolton or 4-3 against Millwall, you think, hang on, that's Bolton and Millwall. Okay, losing 4-3 to Derby is one thing, but I think what came home to roost is that a team like Sheffield United or Wolves that went up and did well were good without the ball. And as much as Norwich were fantastic in 18-19, it's literally all out attack, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So I think that came home to roost. But now when you look at it right now going into the new season, they're in a very, very strong position. So the plan... Look, you'd rather be down here having not spent anything, having all of the parachute money to use and being kind of stable as a club than come down having spent it. Imagine Aston Villa had come down. That would be a total disaster, wouldn't it? So, yeah. Am I surprised? No, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, the post-lockdown, they're terrible, weren't they, Norwich? That's not ideal, but I'm not surprised, and it might not be as bad as people think it is.
I think it is. It's sort of bizarre to hear it and to say it as well, in terms of your idea that Norwich, they aren't in a bad position, are they? I think Stewart Webber has said that we are in the best sort of financial state we've been in since he's been at the club, and I think he's in his fourth year now at the club. And it is sort of bizarre to say that, matched with the fact that Norwich have lost 10 games in a row, and you sort of naturally think that perhaps the sort of the statue that is being built by Stewart Webber is sort of maybe starting to fall or stutter in a way. I don't know if that's a very good sort of analogy to use, but it is really weird, and I don't think I'll ever get my head around it until the end of the season. But I think that's enough for now on Norwich, because we're going to get into that a little bit later, the second half of the podcast. I'm very keen to chat to you and ask you a few questions about last season of the Championship, because it will be very relevant to this season. We know one thing, and that is that the Championship is a very competitive league. I remember I think it was the final day of last season. Was it outside the automatic playoffs? I think it was Brentford, Fulham, and another club, who was it, West Brom, who went up, and it was sort of between them on the final day, which says it's a very, very competitive league. And we know that from the 14-15 season, where there was about a point between first and third when Norwich went off in the playoffs for quite a long
Norwich
time.
Finished third with a big total as well that season,
I think it was 86, 87 points, something like that.
And Ipswich were in sixth with 79, which is high for sixth place as well. So yeah, you're definitely right about 14-15, the tide being high.
It's such an interesting league. But the first thing I want to ask you is a very sort of broad question, and you can sort of choose how to answer this. But what did we miss last season? And we'll get into sort of the nitty gritty of it. But what are sort of the highlights from your perspective?
Well, as you can imagine, look, any league that has 24 teams and 46 games in that schedule is going to be, it's not possible for it to be sensible because of the slog and the whole Saturday, Tuesday for a lot, even more so this season coming up. What did you miss? Well, you didn't miss a powerful top six. So when Norwich went up in 18-19, you had Norwich who were very good, Sheffield United who were very good, Leeds who were very good, and Aston Villa who were very powerful without a big club with some really good players, without necessarily actually having yet clicked as a team. Mm-hmm. Whereas last season, Leeds were very good, West Brom had a very good manager, and then Fulham and Brentford were kind of good, but not there yet. So it wasn't as fierce at the top. However, there were no whipping boys. You'll remember, obviously, Ipswich, Bolton and Rotherham, low points, lots of wins. When you have a league with 4 very good teams and 3 whipping boys, it gets stretched out because the good teams are going to head towards 90 points and the whipping boys are not going to make 40. Whereas we had this insanity at the bottom of the league where at times Luton and Barnsley, who ultimately survived, went on great runs. Wigan, who got relegated, were pretty much the 3rd or 4th best team in the league for about the last 3 months and then had the points deduction. Mm-hmm. So it was very different than the last time you were here in that the league squished up and concertinaed as opposed to stretching out because of the tide at the bottom 6 and only really having Leeds who were really good. And the other thing you missed was just a ludicrous final day where just the most championship thing possible. Nottingham Forest with 30 minutes of the season left were 3 points clear, and it would have taken a 6-goal swing for Swansea to overtake them with 30 minutes to go. Mm-hmm. Forest concede 3, Swansea score 3, and they swap places. Just, you will not see a swing. I don't like the term bottle jobs because it's not really fair on, it's like this idea that a team that doesn't finish in the playoffs is in some kind of way a failure. You don't know where they've come from, do you? But that was the other story. You will not see, you probably will because it's the championship, but that was sensational. So that would be my take homes from last season.
That's really interesting. Now, I like the idea of sort of the swing, whatever you called it there, because, as you said, we're going to see it again at some point. We know the championships can sort of bring us that entertainment, and it's not a tongue-in-cheek remark at all. It's going to happen again, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Hopefully it's not Norwich, because I don't think I'll be able to deal with that. But there is one club that we must talk about, the champions, Leeds. Now, I don't like Leeds very much, but that's because I'm a Norwich fan. I think that's sort of understandable. But there is no denying their quality. What is the difference between this season and the last, 16-17 they spent out of the Premier League? What was the real difference this time around? Was it just sort of an accumulation from 18-19 and sort of that feel of pain again and Bielsa? I think it was his second season last season, wasn't it? What was it that sort of got them over the line by, 10 points? What was it that sort of just did it for them?
Yeah, Bielsa. Literally in one word. It's a cheat code in the championship, isn't it? It's literally an international world-class manager managing a championship team. So, and I'll go back to what I said about 18-19. Bielsa was up against a Norwich team that just clicked and were sensational. Yeah. Chris Wilder doing ridiculous things at Sheffield United, and Aston Villa bombing 90 million quid on wages with Tammy Abraham, Jack Grealish, Tyrone Mings and John McGinn in their first team. So the field stepped clear. I would suggest in most of the last, 10, 15 championship seasons, Leeds 18-19 would have been promoted, and it was just the incredibly crazy last 46 minutes of a playoff semi-final that stopped them. Although Leeds Villa would have been an interesting playoff final, I have to say. But no, I think the field kind of stood aside, but they probably would have gone up Anyway, it just did a fantastic job, and we all saw the football that they played. Brentford and Fulham, probably more to an extent those two than West Brom tried that similar vein, similar to what Norwich will try and do next season. Very sort of passing football and attacking football, but no, they were head and shoulders the best in the end.
What's the deal with Fulham and Brentford then? I don't know who you want to start with, because I remember Fulham, when they got relegated, or just before, they had Scott Parker, and didn't he lose or not win for 6 games? And now it seems absolutely mental to me that he's turned it around and he's taken them up. I think they've played decent football. Now, I did miss the playoff final. I know that, is it Joe Bryan scored that unbelievably smart free kick, I think I'll call it. David Raya did that weird little dive after, which I don't know what that was about. But what is sort of the deal with Fulham at the moment then? Did they deserve to go up? What sort of football did they play?
Well, they had Mitrovic, which if you stick Mitrovic on the pitch for 30 to 40 games in the championships, he will score 20 to 25 goals. So that was the thing that allowed Parker to do what he did, which was try and develop a system of football that didn't ever quite click to the extent of a Farke Norwich or a Bielsa Leeds or a Wilder Sheffield United.
Yeah.
But when you've got a guy who you know is going to score pretty much every game and a half, basically, that buys you some time. They did some good loan deals. So Knockaert and Caballero were loans to convert, and Reed has just converted this season. I think they just about caught up their, how can I word this? The pattern of play just about caught up the ability of their players by the end. Sometimes we see a team that just bullies their way out. Newcastle under Rafa, just bought all the best players and just bullied everybody out of it. Had a good tactical manager, but they just got over the line in the end. But I think it's a mixture of. I think Parker deserves some credit because he did stick to it, and I was there at Fulham with the fans getting on his back as they tried to very slowly play out from the back, refused to bring Tom Cairney back to receive the ball. He was to go further forward, and Reed or Arter were doing it. So he did stick to his guns, but he did have Mitrovic to bail him out every now and then. And in terms of Brentford, it was just too little too late. And what Brentford get with their excellent recruitment, they've paid for the past few seasons with slow starts. So, for example, Ben Rama was sorting his contract out and didn't really play till the start of September. And it was a slow burner. And then, obviously, they were, hell for leather, 7 wins on the trot towards the end of the season. Yeah. But just too little too late. And you worry, and I'm sure we'll come to this with Norwich, about a transfer window closing on October the 5th and star players being taken out of a team. I think maybe Norwich have already recruited to negate that, but you would worry about, say, a Ben Rama or a Watkins or a Henry going out of Brentford on October the 4th. So, yeah, that was the deal with Brentford. Everyone says it, if the season had been 5 games longer, they would have gone up ahead of West Brom. But if that makes sense, that's my explanation of Brentford and Fulham.
I think they're 2 very interesting clubs, aren't they? And I was sort of sad to see Brentford not go up, because from a Norwich City perspective, they did a massive favour for us last season. I remember when they beat Leeds, when they could have put a lot of pressure on Norwich after we drew with Stoke. I don't know if you remember that.
Was that the game?
You were, weren't you? Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that, because you've got a bit of a Leeds curse, haven't you? Which I don't know if that changed last season.
I don't normally play into football banter, but I did a very silly reveal of my face and then the Brentford sign, and then about 40 Sheffield United fans literally just started celebrating. He's at Leeds, they're going to lose, which was mildly amusing. But no, you'd just drawn with Stoke, hadn't you?
Yeah, it was 2-2, and I remember there were sort of scenes after that game, like Marco Stiepermann with his head in his hands, and it was like that was Norwich's chance to sort of clinch it. But thankfully, you went to that game and sort of.
It was all down to me.
It was down to you and Sergi Canos, yeah, down to you and Sergi Canos. Brilliant joint effort, but. Fulham, Brentford, 2 very, very interesting clubs. And that leads me on nicely to a little bit of a chat I want to have about the star players of last season. So if you look at the top goal scorers, you've got Mitrovic and Ollie Watkins, both on 26. Interesting, Lewis Grabban on 20 in second. But tell me a little bit about who sort of were from your eyes anyway, sort of the star players of the Championship season last season.
Well, the interesting thing was that Leeds were so Bielsa'd that you could pick out 3 or 4 of their players, but they didn't. It wasn't literally Hernandez dragging them through. They were just very good as a team.
Yeah.
West Brom, Pereira and Diangana were superb, and if they hadn't have had them, they wouldn't have been promoted. Sawyers was good, but those two. Obviously, Ben Rama for Brentford, but you might not see him next season. I don't know when Norwich play Brentford. Fulham, obviously, Mitrovic was, it's not hard for him to dominate the Championship. Kearney less so this time, and Knockaert and Cavaliero didn't pull up the trees that they've done for Brighton and Wolves before. And then you'd sort of go down the table. Obviously, Matt Cash has literally gone to Villa today. So yeah. Cash, Lolly and Grabban Forest. Grimes and Van der Horn. I'm surprised Norwich didn't go in for Van der Horn at Swansea. Jed Wallace for Millwall. Ben Pearson for Preston. Wayne Rooney, you may have heard of. Derby was excellent, and they've got a few youngsters coming through there. Eze at QPR. John Swift, Reading, and James McLean, Sam Clucas. I'm going all the way down the table now, but those big names that have popped up, and a few of them have already made their way into the Premier League, and a few more that I've just mentioned that are still there will not finish this season in the Championship.
You mentioned some sort of familiar names that I think Jed Wallace sticks out to me the most, and I was looking at the top goal creators, I think assists, is how you should phrase it, of course, that I should have done just then. I think it was Pereira of West Brom got 17 or 16, which is a brilliant return. I think Jed Wallace got 13 as well. Now, I don't really know why I'm using Jed Wallace as an example, but it does lead me to a question I have for you, which is sort of, what is your view on, I think Anthony Knockaert is a good example, actually, on a player who rips up the Championship. We know he's not too good for the Championship, but he's very good in the Championship, but then doesn't make the step up in the Premier League. What's your view on that sort of player? Because you mentioned that Knockaert was on loan at Fulham. I don't know if he's going there permanently.
It's done, yeah.
It's done. So will he be able to make the step up? What's your sort of general view on that type of player?
I feel sorry for some of these players that get labelled that, and with the greatest respect to Norwich, who boss the Championship but struggle in the Premier League.
Yeah.
It depends on the club sometimes, because you'd pick out people like Huckabee and Earnshaw as those type of players. I mean, Huckabee did have more success, but certainly someone like Earnshaw, or Dwight Gale, maybe.
Absolutely.
At the moment, that type of player. I think sometimes they do get typecast because they end up getting purchased by the type of club who can use them in the Championship. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's not all down to play. We've just seen Glenn Murray, age 36, go into Watford, and okay, he's 36 now, and he did score goals in the Premier League. But if he gets 1,500 to 2,000 minutes, he's gonna score 11 goals even at age 36 in the Championship. I don't know. Someone like Knockaert is very interesting, because you just think, what chance does he have of tearing up the Premier League with a Fulham team that's under a manager that's only just really been backed and got his first full contract? It's tricky, isn't it? Sometimes it has to be the player, and you mentioned Lewis Grabban as well, where which Premier League team would sign Lewis Grabban? Probably none of them. Which Championship team would have Lewis Grabban? Probably all of them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know. It's tricky. You wouldn't ever want to, say a player couldn't do it in the Premier League. And my favourite player of all time is Marcus Stewart, who had been like the lowly lower league player, and in a team where he was trusted and was the main guy, scored 20 goals in the Premier League. And you had Grant Holt, obviously, at Norwich, score goals in the Premier League. So sometimes, I guess, if they go up with a team that's going to keep using them in the same way, then it works. But I don't know. They definitely do exist, though, don't they? The kind of 1B David Nugent player that can't do it at the top level but can at the second.
I think it always just depends on sort of the manager, as you said. I think I completely agree with what you said. It sort of depends on how they're used. And you look at a player like Grant Holt, he was used in the exact same way. And how he didn't get a call up to England in, what was it, 11, 12, I'll never know. And I think I completely agree with what you said in terms of the manager. I think when Brighton went up under Chris Hughton, I think it was with Knockout, wasn't it? And he got a little bit more sort of regressive again, because I know they got up to the Premier League with, what word should I use here? A very solid team, similar-ish to Sheffield United in terms of you're sort of solid at the back and anything up top was sort of a luxury. And that happens with teams sometimes. We've seen Sheffield United do that. I'm very interested to see how they do next season, and this idea of sort of how sustainable it is. And I think Knockout as an example, when they got into the Premier League, I think Chris Hughton he didn't panic because he kept them up, but that was through solidarity, and a player like Knockout sort of flourishes in an environment where he attacks.
Ben, if I can come in there, there's proof in the pudding there, because Brighton were very much right, let's be solid, but let's give Knockout freedom. We said Neil Warnock's been brilliant at that through his career. He will let flair players play. You know, he won't let the central midfielders play, but he will let flair players play. And then in a Fulham system where it was about pattern of play and circulating the ball, not right when we're counter-attacking in transition, pass it to Knockout. If you don't pass it to Knockout, I will substitute you. You know what the rules are with some of these. Tarabd at QPR, they were told, look, I don't want you in the final third with the ball. Give it to Tarabd. Whereas, it depends how they're used, doesn't it? And like someone like Knockout or Tarabd will dominate, and then can you do that maybe you can do that with Thierry Henry in the Premier League, or Kevin De Bruyne, but who's gonna do that? You have to be a good team, don't you?
I think that sort of player will always exist in football. It's the same with the Championship and League One. A player who's too good for League One but not good enough for the Championship. That will always be around in football. My next question for you is, now it is important to stress that I didn't follow the Championship last season, so again, this is very much an education for me. Who failed the most last season? Because I've got on my little notes in front of me that I've noted Borough and Huddersfield. They both finished, or they finished above each other by, was it 2 points, something like that? Borough finished 17th, Huddersfield finished 18th. Jonathan Woodgate was sacked in June of 2020, so that was just a couple of months ago. And Jan Stewart, I don't know how to say that, was sacked at the beginning of August, or the end of August, sorry, which is bizarre to me. And the Cowley brothers were sacked a couple of months ago as well. Who am I right in saying they're the clubs who failed the most? Because Borough are quite a big club. Huddersfield had just come down from the Premier League, so you sort of naturally assume that they're going to maybe bounce back up straight away. What went wrong for them?
It's a really good question. I am going to push back on both of them, and I've got another name for you that you haven't mentioned. What went wrong for them is there's parachute payments that Borough ran out and decided to go down the Woodgate route, who was untried and untested with young players, and Flint went back out to Cardiff, and Downing left, and you kind of looked at it and you thought, compared to what Pulis had when he had Traore and whatever you think of him, Bamford and Assombalonga and Friend, you looked and you thought, right, trustworthy Championship players, and then you looked at their team last year and okay, some of them were left over and a lot of sort of young players. So yeah, I think less money in at Borough, but now watch Warnock have him at the top of the league next season just because he's Warnock. But Huddersfield as well, they got the parachute payments and gave them all to pay off the old owner. So they then didn't then have that, whatever. I know Norwich fans are quite prickly about the subject of parachute payments, but whatever the advantage is or isn't, they didn't have it because they whatever you believe, if it's to pay off your Premier League players or to sign a load of new players, they didn't do it. So the name I'd give you, Ben, would be Stoke City, who funded by Bet365, year 2 parachute payment for the second season, firing their manager in the autumn. And look out for them, because under Michael O'Neill, they finished, I snapshotted the table just under his game, 7th best team in the league. And they've already now... Phobia's come back there, and they've added Stephen Fletcher, who's 33, but it's the Championship. James Chester's come back and have taken Morgan Fox. So my argument is they were already the 7th best, and they've added players. Now, okay, yes, we've now added Norwich, Bournemouth, and Watford effectively should be better than them, but they would be my where did they finish? 15th.
Well, they were dead last, weren't they, when he joined?
Yeah, absolutely. Jones was completely lost it. You know when a team's dropping their goalkeeper, that's always my oh god, has it got that bad now? Different formation every game and the keeper goes out. Jones was in that position, but yeah, I would say Stoke over Borough or Huddersfield.
What went wrong for Stoke then? Like, just in general, because they signed, I don't know if you sign a manager, Nathan Jones from Luton, and I think he was perceived to be sort of, I don't know about football's next big thing, but he was meant to be this sort of younger manager who's coming to change the game. He'd obviously done a fantastic job at Luton, and I think Luton fans, I don't know if they were bitter or sort of happy for him to see him go.
No, they're very upset. Yeah.
Well, understandably, of course. But what went wrong? Was it just a case of sort of maybe right man, wrong time, or wrong man, wrong time? Was it just sort of a calamity? Because it looked like one from the outside.
Well, we'll find out whether it's the club or the manager if Michael O'Neill fails as well, because even prior to that, Gary Rowett had, when Norwich were there in 18-19, spent a ton of, I talk about the parachute money, spent all of the parachute money on Afobe and Tom Ince and McLean and Clucas, and you think, oh, this is going to be easy for Stoke. So Jones comes in, and yes, you're right. We all heard about the 4-4-2 diamond and the amazing fullbacks that Luton had, and 2 up front with a number 10 and top of League One and all of that stuff. He tried it at Stoke, and it just wouldn't work. I have to give Jones, and I don't know how to judge this or not, but I have to give the caveat that, and this could be a sign of failure or a sign of bad luck.
Yeah.
But there were about 5 or 6 games at the start of last season where they completely dominated the XG, hit the bar 3 times and still lost. Now, XG conspiracy theorists will say, XG's stupid and that doesn't mean anything, and that just shows their ineptitude in both boxes. Well, if it shows their ineptitude, then XG's not stupid, and we have still drawn a conclusion from it.
Yeah.
Or they were unlucky. So I don't know whether that shows that they were terrible or unlucky. That's the great thing with XG. It can posit one of 2 things, and we don't know. But yeah, it was abysmal failure. And then Benny starts chasing his tail. The system goes, the keeper gets dropped, and then very much what we saw at Ipswich, where pressure and then the individual mistakes start. And Jack Buckland, who was an England goalkeeper at one point, was just lost it in the same way Białkowski did for Ipswich, where you start to see everything crumble, and it's just a ground up rebuild job, and that's what Michael O'Neill seems to be doing. So he was either unlucky or terrible. It's not very good analysis, but
we'll find out next season, won't we? I think you mentioned Jack Buckland, though. I always feel a bit sorry for him, because I remember he was meant to be England's next big goalkeeper, wasn't he? And I remember when we played Stoke, we being Norwich, in the 15-16 season, we drew 1-1, and it was Shaqiri's first game. What a weird period for Stoke that was. And Jack Buckland was absolutely incredible. And I remember Norwich's best chance in that game, this is just completely random, was a 6-yard header, but it fell to Wes Hoolahan, and that's the one person you don't want a header to fall to. But he was so good in that game, and he sort of fought injuries consistently, I'd say, and not managed to find himself. And I always say this on this channel, I often feel really sorry for a goalkeeper when they get a massive injury, because the quality is just not there. We saw it with John Ruddy, we saw it with Fraser Forster, sort of maybe Alex McCarthy, and there's sort of an endless list of goalkeepers who have picked up or were at their peak, got a massive injury and sort of declined. And I remember watching Stoke v Preston last season, and Jack Buckland let in 2 howlers, and I was just like, where is that goalkeeper? Will he come back? And I just don't know. I don't think he knows.
Well, Ben, on the Białkowski thing, he will come back, but Białkowski had to get out of Ipswich, go to Millwall, go and get some love, go and work for a manager who wasn't asking him to do things that he couldn't do, and he was their player of the season. And look, I have to keep telling myself this when I'm doing stuff on my channel. Football fans don't understand goalkeeping. They don't. It's impossible for us. There's 10 outfield players to look at and analyse. There's 1 goalkeeper, and just the psychology of the position and everything is totally different than any other position. And I always make the argument how little we know about goalkeepers of, right, who's the better goalkeeper? Okay, the cross comes in, header at goal, and the keeper dives to his left and tips it over the bar, or the cross never comes in the first place because the goalkeeper positioned his defenders 30 seconds before and the right back blocked the cross, and we don't even know because we can't hear what. Do you know what I mean? It's
absolutely.
We can really judge other positions, and I just remember who was it? It was talking about. It was Rio Ferdinand was talking about Edwin van der Sar, and it was a brilliant bit of punditry because he said, Van der Sar would say 1 step right, 1 step left before a player shot to influence where the shot was going to go and which way he was going to dive. And so we could see Van der Sar make a really simple save, yet this brilliant bit of foresight telling the defender, right, as he shoots, block that way. So if he shoots that way, you're going to block it. And if he goes this way, I'm going to save it. And we don't know that, do we? No, unless we mic up the goalkeeper. So I just wanted to kind of say I think, you and I can watch and analyse and give a good overview of a lot of stuff, but goalkeepers, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, they're their own sort of entity, aren't they? I remember, I don't know where I watched it now, but it was an interview with a player, and they were talking about goalies training. I think it might have been on Jake Humphrey's podcast, and it was like they go and do their own thing at training, so they are literally separate from the outfield players. And I know that's sort of maybe clutching at straws a bit, but it's like a literal representation of that, and it does annoy me a little bit. Some pundits, Gary Neville for example, when he comments on what a goalie should and shouldn't save, and it's a bit like, I know you've got to comment on it because you can't not, but at the same time, the only people who I think will understand goalkeepers are their coaches
100%.
And themselves.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing, and it won't change, but I do have sympathy for goalies quite often, especially because, supporting a club like Norwich, we've been quite fortunate with our goalies in the last few years. You look at Tim Krul, sort of well on his way to sort of being a legend, John Ruddy, a club legend, Angus Gunn, a young Norwich City fan playing a season with the club, Fraser Forster being really good. I could go on. I don't want to carry on because the next goalie takes me to David Marshall, so I don't want to talk about him.
Are you going to see him next season for Derby as well?
We are indeed. Derby, another interesting club. I've got a question. It is about Derby, but it is sort of in general. What club is your surprise package, maybe potentially next season? When I say surprise package, I mean a club, I think it's quite self-explanatory, a club who perhaps we don't expect to succeed, because Derby's a very interesting example, because under Frank Lampard they were pretty decent, but it was very much the case of they got playoffs again, they sort of tinkered within the playoffs for quite some time, and who's the manager? Philip Cocu. Where is he at with the club? He's still there, of course. I'm not getting that wrong, am I?
No, he's still there. Yeah.
Cool, but where's he at then with the club? Because he's got some decent players. You mentioned Wayne Rooney earlier, but who in general, maybe Derby, would be your surprise package? I'll phrase it as.
Yeah, I like that you framed the question you put effort into the question, because I've been asked probably 50 times in the last dark horse, and my question is always. My answer is always a question. Well, what do you mean? Do you mean because if Wycombe avoid relegation, then that is surpassing expectations, isn't it? So I'll give you a fun, pretentious answer, and I'll say Barnsley. Barnsley are a lot of fun, and they've got
really, really rich owners.
Well, they've got links to really, really rich owners, and
is it a consortium, a business consortium or something?
Yeah, so there's links to. And of course, there's a distant link to Billy Bean. So Moneyball gets brought up.
I literally watched that last night, so that is utterly bizarre. That is really weird.
Yeah, so Moneyball always gets brought. So you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But they've got a chap called Gerhard Struber in charge. He was actually like doing bits in the Europa League with Red Bull. No, I'm not allowed to call them RB Salzburg. In Austria, and people expected him to go top 6, championship, maybe even higher in a European league. So they might be a lot of fun, and they don't care. They'll just attack and try and pass the ball around, whether it means they'll be 24th or 8th or what have you. In terms of an actual dark horse, and I'll answer about Derby in a second, Ben. Obviously, I'm such a nerd, no one would surprise me because I know about all of it. But looking at a team that could possibly come out of the pack towards the playoffs, your only possible options really are Bristol City, who have a new manager in Dean Holden who's untried. So that could go very badly wrong at worst. Blackburn, who are very steady under Tony Mowbray, but you would think would need a perfect storm. Millwall, it's got the uniqueness about the club, and Rowett's a good man manager, and there's possible X factor in Troy Parrott on loan from Spurs. You just don't know. Could be brilliant. Could be like Patrick Roberts at you guys and not even get the pitch. So there's all of those guys. Forest will retool. Derby are very interesting actually, because you've got a few factors that I like for improvement. One is you've actually got a manager going into year 2, and you know that if you and I sit here and do this next season, well, you tell me 10, 12, 13 managers will now have been replaced and there'll be new managers. So they've got that. Obviously there's Rooney, who even when he's 38 and if he puts on another stone, will still technically be better than, unless Buendia and Ben Rama actually stay, will technically be better than everyone in the league.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, if he's got people and they've got some very good young players. They've got a guy called Sibley who plays number 10, Bogle, the fullback, who you'll already know about. Very good midfielder called Max Bird, who does Rooney's running. Max Lowe, fullback on the other side, who you'd expect all to improve a little bit. So you might have actually called out the one. And, of course, they were found not guilty of the 2 FFP charges, so they will not be starting on minus 12 points like we thought they might do, like Sheffield Wednesday are. So it might be Derby. Also, have a look out for Forest, because although they did collapse, they finished 7th. They've already added Lyle Taylor to Lewis Grabban, and they've got Luke Freeman as well, which interests me greatly. They've got
Big
him on
fan
loan.
of Luke Freeman. Really like him.
Sheffield United. And although he can be a bit of a fancy Dan, and it'd be interesting to see how he goes with Sabri Lamucci, who's a very team shape and tactical. It just depends. Will they now also spend some of the cash money, the cash, from 14 million, we think, or is that going to be just covering other losses? So there's a few, and then of course you've got Warnock, and you've got Cardiff with parachute payments, and you've got your friends Bournemouth and Watford coming down. Who knows really?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting one. We'll get on to sort of Bournemouth and Watford, I think, towards the end of sort of the Norwich analysis, which we'll move on to now. I think that's a really good sort of catch up on the Championship for last season and in general. I feel far better equipped than what I did about 37 minutes ago going into the Championship season. But I've got a big question, and I think this is going to be a very interesting one, because I've only asked this to Norwich City fans, so there's sort of that being on the inside knowledge of the club and seeing it on the regular. Whereas with you, it's obviously a lot different. I suppose you didn't really watch Norwich last season because you're a Championship man, which is understandable. But Norwich, they lost 10 games in a row. It went catastrophically after the restart, and I say it on this channel, on every single Norwich City fan channel. We've all talked about how Norwich just were terrible. How do you move on from that? How do you change? Because we've had a decent pre-season so far. We play Luton on Saturday, which is tomorrow by the time the viewers are watching this podcast. But how do you move on from losing 10 in a row in such an embarrassing fashion? Because there are 10 new players, but at the same time, as of now, the players who were part of that are still here. How on earth do you sort of begin to move on from that?
Well, you frame it as being part of the plan, which it was, not to lose 10 games, but to gain stability at your club.
Yeah.
And you accentuate the positives, I guess. And we all know that, and we know what, it's not just Norwich fans, we know what football fans are like. You win the first 3 games and no one cares about the 10 defeats.
Absolutely.
So what I would be saying internally to the players was, and Stuart Webber said this publicly, what was the quote about we sent him to war without a gun or something?
That was it, we sent him to war without a gun, yeah.
So they've done as I've sort of suggested, and they've backed the manager and the players by saying, look, we were in a mess. James Maddison, Daniel Farker and Stuart Webber have bailed us out of this mess in spectacular fashion. Mm-hmm. The plan was that we're not going to repeat the mistakes of the past. Therefore, we had to go without gambling any of the money. Now, having done that, we are now... and whether you like that or not is that's a matter of taste, because there are a lot of people, rightly, that would say you never turn up to a fight and don't give it your best. There's a lot of people, and I'm perfectly happy with that view, but there are also a lot of people that say I play the long game. I take the long view. Yeah. And looking at the way the system stacks up in the Championship, and no one knows how to play the system in the Championship better than Stewart Webber. He's proved that twice before now.
Yeah.
Looking at what's the best possible way you can play the system in the Championship? Have parachute payments, have more money than everybody else, have a manager who's already won the division once, have the previous year's top scorer in your team, and retool in that measure, and also work at a club that traditionally dominates in the Championship. So there are a lot of positives you can go with. However, the issue is obviously that October transfer window, and the two things: one, if players do go, are the new ones as significant a downgrade that it makes a really big difference? And it's all now about who goes out and when they go out, and are you downgrading significantly? And you would know more about that than me, but in terms of the actual spirit of your question, which is how you come back from it, look, they might not come back from it. It might all be a disaster, and the players have lost confidence in Farke, and they can't execute what they're asking. And one theory that is out there, that's a doomsday theory for Norwich, is that it was lightning in a bottle in 1819, and that Aarons, Pukki, and Buendia were exponentially responsible for that promotion. I don't think they were. I've not seen.
I've not seen that.
I've not seen a team have a pattern of play that good where you can just put it all down to three players. Do you know what I mean? So I would hope, if you were a Norwich fan, you would agree with me that it wasn't just down to those three players, and that there was a system and a pattern of play that you can put other players in. That's the hope. But you don't know. Buendia could have just been an absolute boss, and maybe they're 30% worse without him. Who knows? We've seen it at teams before. You take one player out, and that makes the whole thing tick. But you would know more about that than me. But in terms of, sorry, I'm rambling now, Ben. But in terms of the spirit of the question, I would focus on all of those things that suggest no, it'd be fine. Write off last season and away you go, and do what Norwich always do in the Championship and boss it.
I really hope that happens. I'm not going to lie to you. You mentioned recruitment, which leads me to my next question, which is, what is your opinion on sort of Norwich's business so far? Because as far as I'm aware, and you mentioned earlier this whole idea of that Norwich is sort of getting the business done before the season starts. I reckon there's probably maybe one or two more ins to come in, and probably quite a few to go out. But what is your opinion? Because they've gone for the same method as they have for the past 3 years. Very cheap players. I think this is probably maybe the most we've spent in a summer transfer window since Webber has arrived, and I don't even think we've broken the £5 million mark, which is very, very interesting. But what is sort of your opinion on players like Kieran Dowell, who've got that football experience within England, players like Przemysław Pocheta, who are sort of these more raw players? Are there any names that maybe, I won't say disappoint you, but surprise you in terms of that have come to Norwich?
It's very, very interesting. And I talked to a friend of mine about this, about Norwich fans' struggle with their identity as a club. And this is where this recruitment kind of plays into that, where Norwich fans want Norwich to be a big club. Which club doesn't want their club to be a big club? And I suppose they're just a step below that. They need to get into the Premier League, stay in the Premier League for 5 years, 10 years, however many, build a bigger stand, draw more fans, and consistently stay in the Premier League. And it kind of switches on its head where when Norwich come down into the Championship, I get a bit confused signals from Norwich fans of there's times where they want to frame Norwich as a big club, and then there's times where they want to frame Norwich as a small club and say, oh no, we're self-funded, we never spend money on transfers. So I feel a bit sorry for Norwich fans sometimes, because there's this kind of crisis of identity, isn't it? Of, in the Championship, are we a big club? Are we a giant? History would say yes. The sweep the championship aside and multiple promotions, and then the other way. So that kind of brings me into the recruitment. And one thing Norwich fans never fail to do is either and all football fans do this, underestimate what they've paid for players and then overestimate what they've sold for to kind of make it read well. Look, the truth is, all the transfer fees have been undisclosed, haven't they? So we don't know what any of the fees are. So if anyone wants to come at me in the comments and say, you're wrong, Ben, fine. But please show me a memorandum with Norwich City's crest on the top that tells me from the club what the transfer fee is, because I hear a lot of absolute rubbish and someone says, oh no, Dowell is actually 800,000. And I'm like, fine, prove it, So... look, obviously they have spent money and they've done sensible deals before, and we know the Buendia deal after the fact. There was a kicker after promotion, and money was then paid after the first season. So we know they do good deals and structured deals. So let's not get into the big club, little club. We do amazing business, all of this stuff. Because all that matters is that the players deliver on the pitch, however much is paid. And frankly, Norwich can afford to pay good money now because they didn't spend last season. They got 45 million quid parachute payment. They're now solvent thanks to the brilliant promotion and all of that. So I wouldn't be alarmed if Norwich did go out and spend 10 million quid on a player. I think that would actually be a good thing. But I just think, having done it on next to nothing the previous time, I think Norwich fans are a bit seduced by this idea. We spent nothing whilst having Tim Closer for 8 million quid on the bench or what have you, and Jordan Rhodes absorbing a vast proportion of his wage. So again, there's that crisis of identity. Anyway, players, I like Hugill. That strikes me as sensible. And if they do it the same way as 18-19, he would be the Rhodes to Pukki as he is now, either a more physical option or a backup from the bench. And if, God forbid, you have to sell Pukki, which you probably don't want to, the starting forward. Yeah. I know nothing about Placheta, and well done on the pronunciation. I imagine Mumba will be a project, and Byron will be ahead of him in the fullback spots. Sinani, Soto, Dennis, Sorensen sounds interesting. That looks like a starting holding midfielder, and I was still thinking Tetty would be lining up for Norwich in 2035 or whatever. So,
he'll be around still, won't he?
Yeah. So I'm interested in Sorensen. Dowell, obviously I know a lot about, and if you get the Dowell that was at Wigan and Nottingham Forest, great, and it looks like an actual number 10, because Stiepermann was playing at number 10, but
he's
was
been
never
given
really
the number 10 as well, so it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. So, but he was Stiepermann played number 10 just to make up for the lack of physicality elsewhere in the front line, didn't they? So I like the recruitment. It all looks good. It just goes back to that question that no one knows the answer to, of how much of a drop-off will it potentially be, depending on who may or may not go out. So, if by some freak of nature, Aarons, Buendia and Pukki are all retained, I don't think the recruitment even matters, because Norwich should be... Do you know what I mean? If you have those three players for an entire championship season, you should be in the top 2 or 3, by default, if they don't get injured. But so I like it, but I'm not sitting on the fence, I promise. It depends who goes out, and after they go out, we'll find, was it all Pukki? Was it all Aarons? Was it all Buendia? Was it all a combination? So what's your view anyway?
Do you know what? You made a really, really good point in terms of the drop-off, potential drop-off, but my sort of, I don't know if it's an argument against it, or a counter, whatever you want to call it, but if you look at that season, players like Pukki Cruel to an extent, Buendia, Max Aarons, that was all their first season in the Championship, so it's a bit like, why can't these players come and do it in their first season? But in terms of the transfer I'm most excited for, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in another podcast that I'm filming, where I'm going to sort of just rate every transfer signing, which I look forward to looking back on and laughing at myself as to how wrong I'm going to be. But for me, Jacob Sorensen is the most exciting, and it really pleases me because Norwich are never going to solve defensive issues. They can sort of tame them and maybe get them under control a little bit more, but we're always going to be a team that concedes a lot of goals. And as long as
this manager is an attacking manager by definition, isn't it?
Literally, it is. Yeah. It's so sort of evident to see. And I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. Jurgen Klopp did that at Liverpool for a good 5 years until he bought Virgil van Dijk and Alisson, which Norwich City probably won't do. But at the same time, it really pleases me to see Stuart Webber, and it doesn't surprise me, is the important thing to say there. It pleases me in the fact that he's identified Norwich's problem, which is protecting the back four. And I think the sort of intention behind Josh Skip as well, Ollie Skip, not Josh Skip, on earth is Josh Skip, and Sorensen, they protect the back four. And they not only that, but they allow Norwich to play. Like Ollie Skip is a player who apparently is quite good with the ball at his feet. Jose Mourinho calls him a future captain for Tottenham, so he must be pretty decent. Whatever your opinion on Jose Mourinho is, he must be fairly decent for him to be saying that. And Sorensen is meant to be a number 8 who's being pushed back into the 6, so you sort of naturally assume he's going to be a bit more technical. Hopefully a bit more athletic than Alex Tettey, who, as you said, will probably be here in 20 years' time in some capacity. Been such a good player for Norwich. And we saw last season how, when we played without him, it just fell apart. So I think them two signings excite me the most. As you mentioned there, players like Poeta, I've not got a clue what to expect from them. All I've heard is that apparently he's maybe a little bit quicker than Adama Traore, which again, incredibly excites me, because another issue for Norwich is the lack of sort of range within the attacking third of the pitch, where we've only got Hernandez, who's really quick. And you look at, I don't know if you watched Norwich towards the end of last season, post restart, when Hernandez played, we had that sort of element of being able to run at teams and sort of get in defenders' faces, which is the most basic thing in football, but yet it seems to be the most effective. But Norwich didn't have enough of that. We have players like Cantwell, Buendia, very good technically, but when it comes down to knocking the ball random and sprinting, we couldn't do it. And a player like Poeta really excites me because that's his game. But I think in terms of transfers, that's probably it. We've talked about transfers for quite some time, which is hard not to with Norwich, because transfers is all they do. I know it sounds bizarre to say that, but that is sort of Webber's speciality, whatever you want to call it.
Just quickly, one more comment. I will go quickly. The team that got promoted in 18-19 never had a stable 2 in the double pivot, did they? I remember it, it's going to be Leitner and Tribal, and then McLean, and then Vrancic, and then Tettey, and and here's Cantwell, and they never. And it was. I remember when they won 8 on the trot. All of a sudden, it was McLean and Tribal again, wasn't it?
I think if you're referring to sort of the January period, it was Leitner and Tribal, not Leitner and Tribal. Leitner was in there somewhere. I can't actually remember.
Yeah, and it was all very like, okay, who's the midfield too? And what Farker was very clever at was, right, this team's winning, and you see, you get the notifications come up on your phone, and Norwich just picked the same team for that entire run, and you're like, right, okay, I get it. He's just sticking with the formula. So they never quite nailed down the midfield 2, did they?
I'm very interested to see how they do that next season. Kenny McLean has just signed a new contract, and for me, that's the most impressive signing for Norwich City, because my neck is on the line here right now. I really rate Kenny McLean, and I think he could be potentially one of the better, I was going to say best, not that brave, one of the better central midfielders in the league, because he's just he's not a utility man, but he does it all. And I saw an interesting tweet that described him as a very sort of divisive player, in terms of this idea that there's not one thing that he does particularly well, but for as much as that was sort of used to maybe criticise him, it's also a strength, because it's like, what can't he do? And I think he's going to be really, really good.
At best, you're very useful, and at worst, you're a jack of all trades, master of none. Can I just ask you a question? Is there any chance that Ben Godfrey ever goes back out? Because I saw him play for Shrewsbury. It was Shrewsbury.
It was Shrewsbury, yeah. I think
under Paul Hurst, would you believe?
Under Paul Hurst, a really bizarre time. I think Carlton Morris was there as well, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah.
we had literally the birth of this channel. We spoke to Stuart Webber about this, and we were in his office, and he was telling us, we were like, Ben Godfrey centre mid, and the answer was just no. There was
there you
never.
go.
Well, no, yeah. The intention, I don't think, was ever to really have him as a central midfielder. I think that's just because he got game time there at Shrewsbury, and that sort of improved his passing range. Because I think the defensive work was always there. He's a player who loves to just throw himself in front of the ball, and at Shrewsbury he learned to be a bit more technical. And in hindsight, it seems like such a really smart thing, which fills me full of praise for Stuart Webber. But I don't want to see Ben Godfrey there because his passing's good, but it's good for a centre back, not good enough to be a centre mid. And I remember probably the best example is Leicester, or the most recent example is Leicester at home, where you've got Godfrey who just sprays a ball out to Max Aarons, crosses it into Jamal Lewis. Jamal Lewis scores, and that's good.
A great goal, that wasn't it?
It was absolutely brilliant, and it was sort of we've seen it a few times as well. We saw it in the 18-19 season as well. But for me, Ben Godfrey is good at passing for a centre back, not as a central midfielder. I wouldn't want to see him there. I think I'd rather see him back in left back than in centre mid, to be completely honest with you, because Norwich, I don't know if you've sort of looked at the squad at all. We are fully stocked for central midfielders at the moment. I think we have a good 7 or 8 at the moment.
They've been for years though now, haven't they? Yeah.
It's such a Norwich City thing, isn't it? And this is where I'm sort of hoping that Norwich are going to have a few outgoings. I think Tom Tribal's definitely off. His wife put up a really bizarre Instagram post about thanking all the Norwich fans.
She's quite the character, isn't she?
She's quite the character. I'm not going to say anything because I'm scared she's going to send me a DM, to be honest with you. But yeah, I do. I will miss Tribal. He's a good player, but Moritz Lartner as well. I think his dangerous ground again. His attitude hasn't been brilliant, and I think that's sort of well known. And I'll tell you what's equally well known, that when there is a sniff of bad attitude at Norwich City, see you later, you're finished.
That's no bad thing, is it?
Not at all, but it's sad to see a player of that sort of calibre go, because I genuinely think he's good enough for the Premier League, but at the same time, I've got to a point in supporting football now where it's like attitude is a very important thing to me, and if you're going to sort of take the mick out of the club and throw your toys at your pram, you know, there are players who want to play. And
speaking of attitude, Ben, can you tell me about Todd Cantwell then?
Do you know what? Todd Cantwell's criticism is totally unwarranted, and I feel really bad for him, because the crap that he gets is because he's a bit, what's the word, quirky. He just believes himself.
It's the way he chooses to present himself, isn't it?
It's like, you know, he's got long hair, and that seems to be a criticism. Well, no, exactly, it seems to be a criticism, and it's just like, Jesus, man. And it's his own fans as well. I do remember when he came on against West Ham at the end of last season, where he had his hair plaited really sort of bizarrely, but he was still the same footballer. And I think he's just someone who doesn't take himself too seriously. And I'm his age, and obviously I'm from Norfolk as well. And it's like, I can sort of relate to him in the sense that he's just doing what he loves, and it's just like, he's getting crap for it for no reason. There's never been a waft of arrogance, one that smells anyway. I think there's a lot of self-belief, as I keep saying. And again, it's an admirable story for him. And I think people should only be behind him rather than in front of him, stopping him, saying, stop doing what you're doing. Because he's Norwich's sort of story, heroic story, whatever you want to call it, where he's a young lad from Dereham. He's come up through the system, he's been out on loan, got that experience, he's come back and he's ripped up the Premier League. And I just, in terms of that was a very passionate rant. I do feel bad for him.
I just think his timing was a bit off. That I think the issue he had was that he was plaiting his hair and doing TikToks whilst losing 10 games on the trot.
There's always going to be that thing, isn't there, where it's like,
I think you get away with it when you're winning, don't you?
Yeah, there's always going to be that thing. You know, it's like the emotion of that specific time, and in general, when the game is being played, anger, you can't control anger. And I remember sort of thinking, when I was watching a game like Everton, for example, which wasn't a bad game from Norwich, but I was fuming at the time. And I think that is perhaps him just being young and maybe a bit naive. Naive is a word that gets sort of banded around here quite often, but I do think it's him being young, and the fact that he was such an important part of Norwich's season. And I don't really think his quality of performance dropped that much, or no more than anybody else's did. So I think I tried to take sort of a sensible approach rather than, oh look, we're losing and he's got funny hair, so I'm going to sort of get angry at him. But I do feel bad for Todd Cantwell, and you know, he won't be the last at Norwich to be like that. Well, he won't be like the last footballer to have that sort of experience that is unwarranted. I think Jack Grealish is another example. Fantastic footballer, absolutely brilliant.
divisive guy, and you're probably the same. It's like because I'll comment on Jack Grealish on my channel, and like people will line up to have a pop at him, and I'm like, have you ever paid for a football ticket and watched that guy play football and didn't enjoy it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't care if his shorts are short and he's a bit of a, might like the attention, rolls his socks down, but yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
There is a sense of envy because he must be doing something right. If people are getting annoyed at your hair, I must admit, I did sort of get annoyed at the socks. Socks is what my one pet peeve in football. Players who have them low just bother me slightly. Todd Cantwell did for a while, but I managed to sort of hold back on that. But there's always going to be the type of footballer who's good enough to sort of, you then don't focus on the football, you focus on their hair, their shorts, their socks, and it's always very interesting. And again, as I said, I'm slightly envious because I'd love to be so good at something where people are then looking at the appearance to try and get under your skin.
Right, yeah.
But the football does the talking, I think, is probably the fair thing to say. Right, we'll move on to the penultimate subject of the podcast. So just quickly now to the viewers, I don't know if anyone's still listening at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't, because I go on so many rants, and you've just seen the Todd Cantwell one there.
They're hanging on your every word, Ben.
Brilliant. I really hope so. But the last two things I'm going to ask you is the team that you think is most similar to Norwich, perhaps, but also I will ask about sort of the other relegated teams, because they're very interesting case studies, and I don't think they could be any more different to Norwich City in the approach. But the first one I'm going to ask is, who is the most similar to Norwich? Because I think for me that's perhaps a threat, but by that what I mean is sort of possession football, out from the back, attempting to be fluid, counter-attacking, attacking, if you want to brand it as that.
That's difficult, because we're now going into a season where you have Gareth Ainsworth signing lots of 6'5" hulking great players and wingers. You've got Paul Warne coming back. You've got Neil Warnock, and we've got Chris Hughton and Mick McCarthy just waiting in the wings for the first job to go. The truth is, you've got Neil Harris at Cardiff as well. So there are a number of, let's just say, going to be more pragmatic. I don't have an issue with that, by the way. I love tactical diversity. I love seeing, Bielsa against Warnock. I think it's great. I think, that fascinates me. Obviously, Brentford, play lovely football. They don't play a 4-2-3-1. It's much more a 4-3-3 type thing. So, but the intention would be similar to Farke at Norwich. Swansea will try it, and to a certain extent succeed, but I've not seen them snap the ball around the way I saw Farke's Norwich in 18-19, and to be honest, at times in the Premier League as well. The speed of the passing and the crispness was still there for a lot of the times, wasn't it? There's not that many. Looking down, Barnsley have good intentions, but nowhere near as good a players as a side like Norwich are going to have. QPR will score loads and concede loads, but it won't be as slick as under Mark Warburton.
Yeah.
They're really there's not.
Is that a good thing for Norwich then? Do you think, where they're their own style and they can impose it on other teams, or do you think that then makes them more maybe predictable in terms of a lack of a plan B? Maybe.
I don't know, because the great theory about playing football the way Daniel Farke does is that if you nail that, no one will beat you. Do you know what I mean? It's like as long as you can defend set plays and you're constantly attacking and moving the ball quickly and creating. It's very simple. The definition of a good football team is, however they do it, they create a lot of good chances and don't concede a lot of good chances. And if the way you do that is you don't concede many chances because you're so busy creating a load of other chances, you don't have to be good at defending. And by the way, if the way that you do that is Neil Warnock's your manager and you don't let anyone within 30 yards of your goal and you create 3 huge chances a game from throw-ins, you're still a good team. Do you know what I mean? That's the definition of a good team. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for Norwich would be very interesting. I mean, they could be out on their own as the only one doing it, and that could be great for them. I can't see a scenario where moving the ball really quickly with good players and creating loads of chances as they did would be a bad thing. Okay, you might you might have one sticky defeat at Wickham or at Rotherham where you play really well and it's a horrible day and they do you from a set play or something like that, or at Middlesbrough under Warnock or something. But you would think they'd be few and far between, and you'd also think that a team like, for example, Derby, who will try and pass the ball coming up against Norwich, wouldn't be able to do it as fast or efficiently as Norwich could. But we need to see that these new players, Sorensen and Placheta and Dowell, can follow Farke's instructions as well as Buendia, Hernandez, Stiepermann were able to in 18-19.
I suppose it's sort of instinct now to the players who've been here for a couple of years, whereas, as you said, the new players, they've got to adapt, and we were lucky enough.
Might not be able to do it.
Well, no, exactly. We were very lucky because in the 18-19 season, everyone adapted really quickly, and it was sort of a blend from learning from the previous season to the new players being fit for the sort of lessons learned from the previous season, and it is just a case of lessons learned and how sort of good of a coach Daniel Farke is, to which my faith comes from the fact that he is a good coach, and despite 10 losses, I think Stuart Hodge said this on a tweet maybe or a podcast, despite them 10 losses, he's still a really good manager. And these players who are going to come in, they're going to need to be sort of individually managed, and they're going to need to sort of blend into the team. We know it should go well. But football's a funny game, isn't it? The Championship's a funny league, so I really
But Ben, just quickly on Farke, I think Dean Smith's a good manager, but players got him up in 18-19. He had good players, and some players win games or what have you. However, one thing we know about football is that you cannot be a bad manager and have your team just happen to play a beautiful pattern of play game after game. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say about Farke. You don't fluke that pattern of play. It's not a fluke. And I had to study it because I'm watching from outside, seeing these last minute goals go in.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, Norwich are lucky. I can't believe this. They're having the luckiest season in the world. And then I went to see Norwich play at Wigan at the end of that season, and they were losing 1-0, and here comes Farke out to the touchline, and I'm sitting there with my little notepad, and he's got 3 subs, and he stands there and he speaks for 3 or 4 minutes, and he's done this, that, and the other, and players come on, and I'm like, Max Aarons has gone as a third centre. What is going on? And it's like this, and I'm like, oh. So this is what happened to get the last minute. He's literally playing like 8 attacking players and 2 back to try and get. And it wasn't luck. And I'm like, okay, I understand now. This wasn't throw a load of balls in the box and make a load of substitutes. It's take a defensive player out, add an attacking player. Plan B, it's your plan A on acid, basically, isn't it?
It's exactly what it is. Yeah.
If you concede possession, you will probably concede a goal. However, your chances of scoring have just gone up 20% or whatever. So he's a good manager.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think what you mentioned there, the whole 18-19 season, sadly it wasn't the same for last season, but it really wasn't a plan B. It was, let's just do plan A a bit better with a couple of different bodies. Did
he try it though? Because I remember that he pulled the left fullback off, tucked the right fullback in. It was almost like a sort of 3-4-3, but massively attacking with like 2 wingers basically. 3 defenders, 2 wingers, 2 holders, 3. It was so attacking. It's
exactly what he did, and I remember because for me, I never looked at games tactically before Daniel Farke. Maybe sort of you can forgive me for age in terms of the fact that I would have been 15, so it's sort of difficult to. But I sort of started to look into it a bit more in depth, and the game that I really noticed it was there was one in the 17-18 season against Barnsley where he got it wrong, massively wrong, but you noticed the difference. And then the following season when we went up, there was a game away to Bristol City, of who were playing quite well at the same time. Marco Stiepermann scored an absolute screamer that day, and Max Aarons goes to left wing back. Someone goes right wing back. I think Buendia or Hernandez goes right wing, when usually he's a left winger, and everyone just sort of moves about. And since then, I've noticed it a few more times, and we've gone on to get really late goals. And that mixed with this constant sort of praising of the triple-double sessions that Daniel Farke is putting on to improve the general fitness. It's like, this guy is, I don't want to say a genius, but this guy he knows what he's doing. And that's what annoyed me last season, because he was undermined quite a lot. But you look at Stuart Webber's comments, we sent him to war without a gun. It's like, it all makes sense now. And obviously it's very difficult at the time when you're playing that badly, or it looks that bad, and you're losing 4-0 at home to West Ham. It's like, but we're in a position now where it's like we can sort of, everything's settled. We've had a good pre-season. It's amazing how much the attitude has changed following a decent pre-season, and it'll be very interesting to see how we do on a decent surface, because the 3 games in Germany were all on really poor pitches, and we know that the way Norwich like to play is sort of fluid and on the floor. So it'll be very, very interesting. But the last question I do want to ask you is about Watford, Bournemouth, Norwich. Now I'm going to sort of give you the floor to take on your general opinion on Bournemouth and Watford in a second, but I do just want to give mine, because mine are very brief, short and sweet. Bournemouth, I don't like Bournemouth. I think Eddie Howe, do you know what? He did a great job, but he was sort of backed by billionaire owners. He spent £20 million on Dominic Solanke. He spent 13...
FFP twice on 2 of the promotions as well.
Well, exactly,
yeah.
And they're in a bit of trouble now, aren't they? Haven't they got to pay off like £84 million, or it could all
well,
go
that
wrong?
figure was correct as of last year, so I don't know. We don't know until the next accounts go through. But, even if it was last year, it's still 81 million quid, isn't it?
Exactly. And they've spent so much money, and it's like, it got to a point for me where the miracle stopped, sort of maybe halfway through their second season in the Premier League, because he'd done brilliant to get them up. They played good, attractive football. I remember them coming to Carrow Road, and I think we beat them or drew, and it was like Callum Wilson scored, and everything was all good. They played really nice football, and I was a bit like, because this was Alex Neil's, I don't know if Alex Neil was there by that point, but it was like, there's a style there. I want that at Norwich. That was the whole period where Neil Adams was in charge, and it was like there was nothing going right at the club. But it was really bizarre anyway, and the miracle ended for me as soon as he started spending money just relentlessly. And I have the same problem with Watford in the fact that they've also spent loads and loads of money, and I don't like their setup. I think, aren't their owners like linked to Udinese, AC Milan maybe, and they sort of have their little triangle where managers bounce to and from Watford, and it's like, if I was a Watford fan, I would hate that, because there's no sustainability, there's no consistency. And when I saw them go down, I was a bit like, that's what you get for sort of messing around with the fans. Now, I feel sorry for the fans. I always feel sorry for fans when they go down. But I think Watford sort of deserved it, because they'd gone through 3 managers in a season. They sacked Nigel Pearson, and I think whilst he was out of the relegation zone, and it was just like, you get what you deserve in football. And I'm a bit more hostile towards Watford than I am Bournemouth. I don't know if you can tell. But they're my sort of views. I'm very keen to know yours.
It's tricky. You would know more about the actual players there from watching them in the Premier League. I have the same attitude generally about all relegated teams to the Championship, that in theory, unless you make really bad operational decisions, and you were not run in a way that was very silly financially before you went down, in theory, and football is not played in theory, it's played on grass, but in theory, the advantage that you should have of the remaining Premier League players plus the parachute payment, especially the giant year 1-1, that all, unless you really bodge it up, like we've seen Stoke do, and Sunderland didn't want to know, the owner wanted out, they finished bottom with a year 1 parachute payment. So look, I'm not saying everyone, and don't get prickly Norwich fans about parachute payments, I'm not saying everyone is destined to use the advantage. You can give me a 50-metre advantage in a 100-metre sprint race, but if I sit texting on my phone for the first 10 seconds, you will still beat me. Do you know what I mean?
That is a brilliant analogy. That really is.
It is possible to lose with an advantage. I class Watford in the same bracket as Norwich in terms of they seem to just boss the Championship when they're in it. I don't class Bournemouth in that category. The way they went up, and it's a big scene change at Bournemouth, and Jason Tyndall's unproven. Ivic, the Watford manager, looks like a winner, but in Greece and in Israel. Now, it might be that managing Watford with parachute payments in the Championship is the same as managing Maccabi Tel Aviv in Israel. It might be the same thing, and he can press the advantage home. I don't know. It's so hard to tell. I'm not just saying it's because I'm speaking to you. I would much, much, much rather be a Norwich fan with Stuart Webber.
It's a lot more organic, isn't it?
Yeah, but with these people in my club, Stuart Webber, Daniel Farker, not having spent a ton of money, Timu Puki, Max Aarons, Emi Buendia, name those players. I would much rather, with the manager that last time he was in the Championship won it, and a sporting director that's been promoted out of it twice, and with different clubs as well.
Yeah.
So I would most prefer to, and obviously as an Ipswich fan, I'm not saying I would prefer to be a Norwich fan, but out of the three, I would fancy Norwich's chances the best. Then I just think Watford will be next in that list. And Bournemouth, I would worry there's too much transition and too many moving parts for it to be too smooth.
The manager's a bizarre one at Bournemouth, isn't it? Because wasn't he...
the assistant,
yeah, he was the assistant. To me, that's bizarre.
And they've done the same thing at Bristol City. Whether these are COVID-related hires and people aren't gambling on bringing new people in, I don't know. As a blanket rule, which are never good in analysing football, but as a blanket rule, I never understand. So the guy you've just fired, the guy that was working for him and is less qualified than him, is now doing his job. That, I don't know. That
strange.
But hey, I'm sure someone will be able to comment in with an example of where it's worked. And what I will say, last time Watford were promoted, they had 4 managers that season as well. I think Mackay may have started it, and no, Zola.
I think it was Zola.
Billy McKinley, Jukanovic finished. I can't remember who the other one was. Another Italian, I think, as well. But it worked for Chelsea, but they had Roman Abramovich.
Yeah.
So that may have been the reason. And John Terry, Frank Lampard, Peter Cech, and Didier Drogba. But yeah, I'm interested to see what happens. It tends to be so split with the teams that come down the first season. They either finish in the top 5 or they finish 15th.
Yep.
Because there's a big, reorganising. A manager will go out during the season. They can't cope with all the chaos. And you would hope as a Norwich fan that they've been set for this for a good few months now and they can cope with the chaos.
It'd be very interesting, and we've seen a fair few examples at Norwich City. Obviously, this relegation being a record one from the Premier League, I think if we go up, it'll be a record promotion. So we could potentially right the wrong in terms of records that we set. But it'll be very interesting. As I said, we've seen so many examples. We saw Norwich come down from the Premier League following Chris Hughton, go straight back up after a really good season with Neil Adams and Alex Neil. And then we've also seen Norwich come down in the 15-16 season, massively bottle the league. In the 16-17 season, I don't know how good your memory is on that, but we bottled it massively in December. I think we were top of the league. I remember beating Wolves away, thinking, right, this is it. Robbie Brady's going to lead us to glory. Did he? No, he didn't. And I think Alex Neil completely sort of lost his marbles. I think he got sacked when we were 14th. Alan Irvin came in. Stuart Webber came in. The rest has been history. But I think that's everything for this podcast. I don't know if you have any other comments in the Championship, anything to watch out for before we wrap up?
No, I think, look, whatever we try and however analytical we are about the Championship, full well that there'll be 2 or 3 clubs that we expected to be low will be high, 2 or 3 clubs we expected to be high will be low, and probably by November 4 managers will have changed, and by the end of the season when the pitch is clearer, over 10 likely managers will be changed, and this season more than ever, because we're losing 4 weeks, the chaos. The best thing Norwich can probably do is go and lose to Luton and get knocked out of the Carabao Cup, get that done, and get 2 points per game on the board for the first 17, 18 games and get themselves an advantage. And you just got to hope, if you're a Norwich fan, that the transfer window and it being in October and whoever may or not go out doesn't unsettle things. And like we said, the only way I can see Norwich not being at least in the top 4, but they should be in the top 3 or the top 2, would be if the 18-19 was not predicated on Webber, not predicated on Farker, but whoever gets sold were so good that they carried no. And I think you and I both feel that that's probably not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be looking forward to it if I was a Norwich fan. Put it that way. It's always fun watching your team win, isn't it? Whatever league it's in, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen it before. Hopefully we'll see it again. I think the last thing I'll say is the biggest challenge that Norwich City face, it's obviously the biggest challenge of Daniel Farke's career, is the fact that we've now lost this sort of underdog mentality and this sort of going under the radar. We are now expected to finish really high, and I sort of want to nudge the viewers in the direction of Gab Sutton's sort of prediction of the table, and he put Norwich third.
Where did he have you?
So he puts third. Puts third.
Who did he have first and second?
He had, I think, Watford second, Brentford first,
Okay.
and I smiled when I saw it. I was like, a bit of belief, but at the same time I was like, oh God, we've lost the sort of underdog thing. And the beauty of the 18-19 season was the fact that no one saw it coming, apart from maybe Daniel Farke, Stewart Webber, what have you. But I think that's just about everything. Well, no, I don't think anyone did.
They didn't see it.
That was me being a bit pretentious, I think, is the word I'll go for there. But Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm very much looking forward to watching this again in 9 months to see how wrong we were maybe. But it'll be interesting nonetheless. There are many twists and turns to be had. Not that I really need to, but where can people find you on sort of your socials and YouTube, etc.?
And just going in on what you said, we have these conversations in good faith, and we say what we think at the time, and
then we laugh at it.
And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But no. So yeah, it's the Benjamin Bloom Football Channel on YouTube, and we cover all things Championship. Very very regularly, reviews, previews, etc. etc. And there will be a lot of Norwich this season, because we're expecting you to be high up in the table, and one of the big stories of the season. Twitter is at Benjamin Bloom, and I don't have a job anymore. I'm making a go of this, so patreon.com/Benjamin Bloom. For as little as $3 a month, you can maybe let me live the fantasy of spending my time just waffling about football all day long. Wouldn't that be a fine thing? But yeah, so you can go and help out there. But thank you for having me on, Ben.
No worries at all. All of Ben's stuff will be down in the description box down below. I'm sure it'll be on the screen as he says it, as I'm getting quite sort of nifty with this little editing stuff. I'm quite enjoying it. But yeah, that's just about everything. In terms of videos to come, there's a couple of podcasts where we're going to talk about Norwich City's signings, which, much like this video, I'm looking forward to laughing back on. It's a bit like that last season where I was very sort of promised and happy and excited for the season, and what unfolded. But that's all to come. And I think as of next week, the usual season content continues, resumes, whatever word you want to use. So until next time, we'll see you again very, very soon.